The sky is burning. Metal screams against metal as tracer rounds slice through the frozen air like angry fireflies. Inside the ball turret of a B-17 Flying Fortress, suspended 22,000 feet above Nazi Germany, a kid who fixes engines is about to become a legend. His hands shake on the twin .50 caliber machine guns. He's never done this before. Never trained for this. Never wanted this. A Focke-Wulf 190 rolls into view, its propeller spinning like a circular saw designed to cut bombers from the sky. Alan Magee's finger finds the trigger. The guns roar. The fighter explodes into orange flame and black smoke, tumbling toward the earth like a broken toy. He doesn't have time to process what just happened. 2 more German fighters are already lining up their attack runs. This is March 3, 1944. The air war over Europe has become a meat grinder, consuming young men and their flying machines with industrial efficiency. The average life expectancy of a ball turret gunner is measured in missions, not months. Alan Magee is 20 years old, a mechanic from Plainfield, New Jersey, who volunteered to fill in for a sick gunner. He's about to fight the battle of his life in a glass sphere barely large enough to contain his curled-up body. The German fighters come in waves, their cannons flashing like camera bulbs photographing death. Magee fires back, his world reduced to the simple mathematics of lead and angle, predator and prey. 1 by 1, enemy aircraft fall from the sky. 3 down, 5 down, 8 down. His guns glow red-hot, the smell of cordite and hydraulic fluid filling his tiny metal womb. But something is wrong. The bomber shudders. Smoke pours from the number 3 engine. The intercom crackles with panic and static. Above him, in the fuselage he cannot see, his crewmates are dying. The B-17 is coming apart, piece by piece, rivet by rivet. And Alan Magee, who has just shot down 12 enemy fighters in the most extraordinary display of aerial gunnery in American military history, is about to face something far worse than combat. He's about to fall 4 miles without a parachute and live to tell about it. March 1944. The Third Reich is dying, but it's dying hard, clawing at its enemies with the fury of a cornered animal. Every day, hundreds of American bombers thunder across the English Channel, heading deep into Germany to tear apart the Nazi war machine, one factory, one railroad, one city at a time. The cost is staggering. Young men climb into their aircraft knowing that statistically, they won't survive their tour of duty. 25 missions. That's all they need to complete. Most never see mission 15. The B-17 Flying Fortress is both marvel and coffin. A 4-engine heavy bomber bristling with machine guns, carrying tons of high explosives into the most defended airspace in human history. It's called a fortress, but that's propaganda. German fighters tear through them like wolves through a flock of sheep. Anti-aircraft fire fills the sky with black blooms of shrapnel that can rip a man in half. And the cold at altitude is so severe that exposed skin freezes to metal in seconds, that oxygen masks frost over with ice formed from a boy's own breath. The ball turret is the worst position on the aircraft. A plexiglass sphere mounted to the belly of the plane, just large enough for one man to fold himself into a fetal position with 2 machine guns for company. No armor. No escape hatch. If the landing gear fails, the ball turret gunner gets crushed against the runway. If the plane goes down, he's trapped. It's a position that requires both extraordinary courage and a certain acceptance of fate. Alan Magee wasn't supposed to be in that turret. He was a mechanic, a kid who was good with his hands, who understood engines and hydraulics. But on March 3, 1944, the regular ball turret gunner was sick, and someone had to take his place. Magee volunteered. He'd fired the guns in training, sure, but he'd never faced combat. Never seen a German fighter up close. Never felt the specific terror of being hunted by an enemy pilot who's just as scared and just as determined as you are. In a few hours, he would shoot down 12 enemy aircraft. A feat so extraordinary that even today, historians struggle to verify all the details. But more than that, he would survive an event so impossible, so statistically improbable, that it would be studied by doctors, physicists, and military analysts for decades. His story isn't just about combat. It's about the mysterious resilience of the human body, the thin line between life and death, and the moments when fate seems to rewrite its own rules. This is the story of the day Alan Magee fell from the sky and refused to die. If you love real stories, full of emotion, courage, and secrets from the past, subscribe to the channel now and hit that notification bell. Leave your like to strengthen this work and help this story reach more people. And tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching this video from? I love knowing how far these stories travel. The ball turret hangs beneath the B-17 like a tumor made of steel and glass, rotating on a central axis with mechanical precision. From the outside, it looks almost elegant, a sphere of plexiglass and aluminum that could be mistaken for something scientific, something built for observation rather than killing. But from the inside, curled into a space barely 4 feet in diameter, Alan Magee knows the truth. This isn't a weapon station. It's a coffin with a view, a front row seat to your own death, a place where boys go to learn what their bodies look like when shrapnel passes through them at supersonic speed. He squeezes himself into position, his knees drawn up to his chest, his feet braced against the stirrups welded to the turret's frame. The twin .50 caliber machine guns angle downward between his legs like steel tusks. His hands find the control grips instinctively. Left hand for turret rotation, right hand for elevation, both thumbs resting on the firing buttons that will send 750 rounds per minute screaming into the frozen air. The oxygen mask covers his face, hissing with each breath, the rubber cold against his skin even through his flight suit. Around him, the plexiglass is already fogging at the edges, ice crystals forming delicate patterns that look like frozen flowers. The intercom crackles to life, static and voices, the pilot running through final checks, the navigator calling out headings, the waist gunners making dark jokes to keep the fear at bay. Magee listens but doesn't speak. What would he say? That he's terrified? That he wishes the regular gunner wasn't sick? That he joined the Army Air Forces to fix planes, not to kill from inside them? The other men don't need to hear his fear. They're carrying enough of their own, packed tight in their chests like extra ammunition, like wounds that haven't bled yet. The B-17 shudders as the engines roar to full power, the whole aircraft trembling like a living thing straining against invisible chains. Through the plexiglass beneath his feet, Magee watches the English runway drop away, the green fields and hedgerows shrinking into a patchwork quilt, then into abstraction, then into nothing but distance. The bomber climbs and climbs, the air growing thinner and colder with each 1,000 feet of altitude. At 10,000 feet, his breath becomes visible inside the mask. At 15,000 feet, his fingers start to go numb despite the heated gloves. At 22,000 feet, where the formation finally levels off, the temperature outside has dropped to 40 degrees below zero. The sky at this altitude is a color that doesn't exist on Earth. A blue so deep and pure it looks almost black, empty of clouds, empty of birds, empty of everything except the steady drone of 400 American bombers heading east toward Germany. Magee rotates the turret slowly, testing the controls, watching the other B-17s hold their tight formations. Each bomber bristles with guns, each carries 10 young men who wrote letters home last night, who ate powdered eggs for breakfast, who pretend they're not imagining what it feels like when a 20mm cannon shell punches through aluminum skin and human flesh with equal indifference. Below, the English Channel passes like wrinkled silk, then the coast of France, then the patchwork of occupied Europe, fields and forests and towns that look peaceful from 4 miles up, that look like they could be anywhere, could be safe. But Magee knows better. Every inch of that ground is contested, soaked in blood, torn by war. And somewhere ahead, beyond the horizon that curves with the earth itself, German fighter pilots are already scrambling to their aircraft. They've seen the radar returns. They know the bombers are coming. They're climbing into their own metal coffins right now, checking their own guns, saying their own prayers to their own gods. The waiting is the worst part. Worse than the fighting will be, worse than the fear of dying. In the waiting, your mind goes to places it shouldn't go, imagines scenarios in perfect detail, rehearses your death in 1,000 different variations. Magee tries to focus on his breathing, on the mechanical rhythm of the oxygen flowing into his mask. He thinks about home, about New Jersey, about a world where the biggest problem was a carburetor that wouldn't idle right. That world feels like fiction now, like something he read in a book once and only half believed. Then the intercom erupts with urgent voices, and the waiting is over. The first German fighter appears like a dark angel materializing from nothing. A Focke-Wulf 190 rolling out of the sun where vision goes white and blind, where predators hide in plain sight. It comes in fast and steep, its nose lit up with cannon fire, orange flashes strobing against the perfect blue sky. Tracer rounds arc through the formation like laser beams in some science fiction nightmare, except these are real, these are moving at 3,000 feet per second. These are designed to punch through metal and bone and keep going. The B-17 to Magee's left shudders as rounds walk across its wing, puncturing fuel tanks, severing control cables, killing the hydraulics that keep a bomber airborne. Magee's hands move before his mind catches up. Muscle memory from training taking over, his left hand spinning the turret toward the threat, his right hand elevating the guns, his thumbs finding the firing buttons and pressing down hard. The twin .50 calibers roar to life with a sound that's more felt than heard. A jackhammer vibration that travels through the guns and into his arms and into his chest where his heart is already hammering. The guns buck and shudder, spitting out brass casings that tumble away into the void below. He can see his tracers reaching out like fingers of light, converging on the German fighter as it screams past at a combined closure rate of over 500 miles per hour. The Focke-Wulf 190 explodes. Not gradually, not cinematically, just instant transformation from aircraft to fireball, from machine to chaos, from threat to falling debris. Pieces of wing and fuselage tumble past Magee's turret, trailing smoke and flame like dying comets. He catches a glimpse of the pilot's canopy spinning away. Empty or not empty, he can't tell and doesn't want to know. There's no time for reflection, no time for guilt or triumph or any of the emotions that combat is supposed to trigger. Because 2 more fighters are already lining up their attack runs. And behind them, 3 more, and behind those, the whole German fighter force seems to be converging on this single formation like sharks drawn to blood in the water. The sky becomes a geometry problem written in tracer fire and cannon smoke. Magee rotates the turret in smooth, continuous arcs, his eyes scanning for targets, his brain calculating intercept angles without conscious thought. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 dives from above, its yellow nose spinner bright against the dark camouflage of its fuselage. Magee leads it by 3 lengths, presses the triggers, watches his rounds tear into the engine cowling. White smoke erupts from the German fighter, then black, then orange flame. It peels away from the formation, trailing fire like a banner, the pilot fighting for control that will never come. That's 2 down. Magee's hands are already moving toward the next threat. The intercom is chaos now. Voices overlapping, shouting coordinates and warnings, calling out fighters at 6 o'clock and 12 o'clock and 3 o'clock. The whole circle of the sky filled with enemy aircraft like wolves circling a wounded elk. The B-17 shakes with impacts, German rounds punching through aluminum skin, the sound like someone hammering nails through a tin roof. Somewhere above Magee's position, in the main fuselage he cannot see, men are dying. He knows this the way you know facts that your mind refuses to process, that get filed away for later when there's time for grief. Right now there's only the shooting, only the next target, only the grim mathematics of survival. A Focke-Wulf 190 comes in from dead ahead, head-on attack, the worst kind, both aircraft closing at maximum speed. Both pilots committed to a collision course, whoever breaks first loses. Magee doesn't break. He centers the gun sight on the fighter's spinner, watches it grow larger and larger in his view, watches the German pilot's cannon fire walking toward his position. At the last possible second, he presses both triggers and holds them down, sending a sustained burst into the oncoming fighter. The Focke-Wulf's canopy shatters. The aircraft snaps into a violent roll and passes so close to the B-17 that Magee can see the individual rivets on its fuselage. It misses by feet, maybe inches, then drops away trailing pieces of itself. 3 down. The battle has lasted maybe 4 minutes, but time has become elastic, stretched and compressed by adrenaline and terror and the strange clarity that comes when death stops being theoretical and becomes the air you breathe. Magee's world has contracted to the space inside his turret, to the plexiglass hemisphere that shows him everything and protects him from nothing. His guns are hot now, heat waves rising from the barrels, the smell of burning oil and cordite filling his oxygen mask. His ammunition belts feed round after round into the weapons, the brass links breaking away and falling into the collection bag, the mechanical rhythm of it almost soothing in its reliability. Load, fire, eject. Load, fire, eject. A machine serving a machine, fed by a human who is himself becoming something mechanical, something efficient, something capable of taking lives without pause. And still the German fighters come, wave after wave, their pilots as brave and as terrified as the Americans they're trying to kill, all of them trapped in a dance choreographed by old men in safe rooms who will never know what it's like to fight at 22,000 feet where the air is too thin to breathe and the cold is so intense it can freeze your blood in your veins if the bullets don't spill at first. 4 down. 5 down. 6 down. Magee has stopped counting consciously, but somewhere in the back of his mind, some mechanical part of his brain is keeping score like a clerk tallying inventory. Each German fighter that falls is one less threat, one less set of guns firing at his bomber, one less pilot trying to punch his ticket to eternity. But the numbers don't comfort him. For every fighter he destroys, 2 more seem to appear from the endless blue, as if the Luftwaffe has an infinite supply of young men willing to die in defense of the Reich. The sky has become a crucible, a forge where boys are transformed into killers or corpses, where there is no middle ground, no place for hesitation or mercy or any of the civilized virtues that people claim make us human. A Messerschmitt Bf 109 comes at him from below, a tactic that should be suicide against a ball turret gunner, attacking from directly beneath where Magee has the clearest field of fire, where there's nowhere to hide, nowhere to use speed or altitude as protection. But this pilot is either brave or desperate or both, closing fast with his guns blazing, betting everything on a single devastating pass. Magee rotates the turret to track the target, his movements smooth now, almost graceful, the terror burned away by repetition and replaced with something colder, something more dangerous. He waits until the Bf 109 fills his gun sight, until he can see the oil streaks on its cowling, until there's no possibility of missing. Then he fires a 3-second burst that tears the German fighter's left wing clean off at the root. The Messerschmitt tumbles like a leaf in a hurricane, spinning end over end, the pilot trapped inside experiencing G-forces that would crush a human body like a grape in a fist. It falls away toward the earth 4 miles below, toward the fields and forests of Germany where it will make a crater that local farmers will plow around for generations, where pieces of it will turn up in the soil decades later like archaeological artifacts from a civilization that worshipped speed and violence. 7 down. Magee's hands are steady on the controls now, the shaking gone, replaced by the cold precision of a craftsman doing familiar work. This is what adaptation looks like, the human nervous system rewiring itself in real time, learning to function in conditions that should be impossible, that should break the mind but instead sharpen it to a terrible edge. The bomber shakes again, harder this time. A violent lurch that throws Magee against the side of the turret hard enough to leave bruises that will purple his ribs for weeks if he lives that long. Something has hit the aircraft, something big, maybe a 20mm cannon shell, maybe a piece of another bomber falling from above. The intercom is screaming now, multiple voices overlapping in panic, someone calling for the pilot who doesn't answer, someone else praying in Spanish or maybe Italian, the words coming fast and desperate and utterly sincere. Magee can smell smoke, acrid and chemical, the smell of things burning that were never meant to burn. But the bomber is still flying, the engines still roaring, the props still clawing at the thin air, pulling them forward toward the target that they may never reach. 2 Focke-Wulf 190s come in together, a coordinated attack from opposite sides trying to split his attention, betting that he can't engage both targets simultaneously. They're right, but they've made a mistake in timing. The one on the left is a half-second faster, commits to his attack run a fraction earlier, and that fraction is enough. Magee engages the left fighter first, walks his tracers across its fuselage from tail to nose, sees the canopy shatter and the aircraft snap into a spin. Then he pivots the turret right, finds the second fighter already breaking off, the pilot smart enough to recognize that his wingman's death has bought him nothing but a few extra seconds of life. Magee fires anyway, a long burst that reaches out across the sky, and is rewarded with the sight of the fighter trailing white coolant smoke. It won't make it home. 8 down. His ammunition counters are running low now, the belts feeding into his guns showing more gaps than rounds, the supply that seemed infinite 10 minutes ago suddenly finite and precious. He does the math instinctively, maybe 200 rounds left between both guns, Maybe 30 seconds of trigger time if he's conservative, 15 if he's not. Every shot has to count now. Every burst has to find its target. There's no room left for suppressive fire, for warning shots, for anything except the cold calculus of maximum lethality per round expended. This is what war does. It transforms moral questions into engineering problems, turns killing into a form of resource management, makes monsters of mechanics who only wanted to fix engines and go home. The German fighters are pulling back now, breaking off their attacks, their pilots low on fuel or ammunition or courage or all three at once. The formation of bombers continues forward, ragged now, gaps where aircraft used to be, smoke trails marking the paths of bombers falling toward the earth with their crews still inside, still hoping for some miracle of aerodynamics or divine intervention that will never come. Magee allows himself one deep breath, one moment of thinking that maybe he'll survive this mission, maybe he'll get to write another letter home, maybe he'll get to tell the story to his grandchildren someday when wars are just history and young men don't have to die in glass spheres hanging beneath bombers. One moment of hope. The first burst of anti-aircraft fire blooms in the sky like a black rose opening its petals. A sphere of smoke and shrapnel that appears where empty air existed a microsecond before. Then another burst, and another, until the sky ahead is filled with them. Hundreds of dark flowers blossoming in perfect geometric patterns. A garden of death planted by German gunners on the ground who are calculating trajectories and fuse timings with slide rules and prayer, who are trying to murder men they cannot see, will never meet, whose names they'll never know. The flak bursts make no sound that Magee can hear over the roar of the engines and the wind, but he can feel them. Pressure waves that shake the bomber, that rattle his teeth in his skull, that remind him that the plexiglass surrounding him is only a quarter-inch thick and that shrapnel moves faster than the eye can follow. The formation flies straight into the flak field because there's no choice, because the target is ahead and the mission is to bomb the target no matter the cost. No matter how many aircraft fall, no matter how many men die with their blood flash frozen before it can pool on the fuselage floor. Magee watches the black bursts walk across the sky toward his position, watches them march closer with the inevitability of fate, with the mathematical precision of artillery that has been refined over 4 years of war into something approaching perfection. A burst appears directly ahead, so close that fragments of hot steel pepper the plexiglass like hail on a windshield, leaving star-shaped cracks that spread like frozen lightning. The material holds, but barely, and Magee finds himself staring at his own death deferred by nothing more than a quarter-inch of specially manufactured glass. The B-17 to his right takes a direct hit. A flak burst that appears inside the aircraft rather than outside it, as if the shell had read the engineering drawings and knew exactly where to find the bomb bay, where to find the high explosives stacked and armed and waiting to be dropped. The bomber doesn't explode so much as it ceases to exist. One moment it's there, 10 men and 4 engines and 65,000 pounds of aluminum and hope. The next moment it's an expanding sphere of orange fire and black smoke. A small sun born and dying in the same instant. Pieces of it rain down through the formation, chunks of wing and fuselage and landing gear, and other pieces that Magee tries not to identify, that his brain refuses to categorize as human because categorizing them would mean acknowledging what war really is, what it really does to the soft bodies that civilizations send to fight each other. His own bomber lurches violently to the left, and Magee's stomach drops as the aircraft seems to hang in the air, suspended between flight and falling, between life and whatever comes after. The number 3 engine is on fire now, visible from his position as orange flames streaming back from the cowling, eating at the wing like a hungry thing, weakening the aluminum structure that holds everything together. The pilot feathers the prop, shuts down the engine and lets the blades align with the airflow to reduce drag. But the fire doesn't stop, doesn't care about pilot technique or emergency procedures or any of the training that's supposed to keep bombers in the sky. It just burns and spreads and consumes, patient and thorough and utterly indifferent. More flak bursts bracket the formation, the German gunners adjusting their aim, walking their fire across the sky like a farmer plowing a field, systematic and methodical and deadly efficient. A burst appears beneath Magee's turret, so close that the concussion lifts the entire bomber 20 feet in the air, so close that he can hear it even through the engine noise and the wind. A sharp crack like the world breaking in half, followed by the sound of shrapnel tearing through aluminum, through hydraulic lines, through the structural members that keep an aircraft shaped like an aircraft. The turret fills with a fine mist of hydraulic fluid, red as blood, coating the inside of the plexiglass, coating Magee's flight suit, coating his oxygen mask until he has to wipe it away with his glove to see. The intercom is dead now, just static, just the hiss of empty frequencies where voices used to be. Magee is alone with his thoughts for the first time since the mission began. Alone in his glass sphere with nothing but the roar of 3 remaining engines and the whistle of wind through holes that shouldn't be there, through tears in the fuselage that make the bomber more colander than aircraft. He tries to raise anyone on the intercom, presses the transmit button and speaks into the mask, asking for status, asking for orders, asking if anyone up there is still alive. Nothing comes back. Just static. Just the sound of a frequency with no one left to use it. The bomber is losing altitude now, falling behind the formation, becoming the straggler that German fighters hunt like wolves, separating the weak from the herd. Magee rotates the turret slowly, scanning the sky for threats, his ammunition counters reading nearly empty, his guns still hot from the earlier engagement. He knows what comes next. Every man who flies combat missions knows what comes next when you fall out of formation, when you're damaged and slow and alone in hostile skies. The fighters will come back. They always come back. They can smell vulnerability the way sharks smell blood. And they'll circle and strike and circle again until there's nothing left but pieces falling toward the earth. And Magee will be ready, or as ready as any 20-year-old mechanic can be when he's down to his last few rounds and the sky is full of enemies and the bomber beneath him is dying one system at a time, 1 degree of altitude at a time, 1 moment at a time. They come out of the sun again, for Messerschmitt Bf 109s in a loose formation. Their yellow nose spinners bright as warning signs, as predatory eyes fixed on wounded prey. Magee sees them when they're still 2 miles out, dark crosses against the burning blue, and he knows with absolute certainty that this is the end of something. The end of the mission, the end of the bomber, maybe the end of everything. His ammunition counters read 73 rounds in the left gun, 68 in the right, enough for maybe 2 good bursts if he's careful, if he makes every round count, if luck decides to side with mechanics from New Jersey instead of fighter pilots from Bavaria. He centers the turret on the lead fighter and waits, his breathing steady now, his heart rate dropping into something almost like calm, the way condemned men are supposed to feel when they've accepted their fate and found peace in the acceptance. The lead Messerschmitt opens fire at 800 yards, too far for accuracy but close enough to make a statement, to let the crippled bomber know that death is coming and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it. Magee waits. 600 yards. 400 yards. The fighter's guns flash again, and Magee can see the rounds walking toward his position, can see the tracers drawing lines in the air like threads connecting predator to prey. At 300 yards he presses both triggers and holds them down, sends every remaining round in both guns streaming toward the Messerschmitt in one sustained burst that lasts exactly 7 seconds and empties his guns completely. His tracers converge on the German fighter like fingers closing around a throat, and he watches them tear into the engine, into the cockpit, into the pilot who had a name and a family and dreams that will never be realized. The Messerschmitt noses over and falls, trailing smoke and pieces of itself, and Magee feels nothing. No triumph, no guilt, no satisfaction, nothing but the empty numbness that comes when you've crossed so far beyond the boundaries of normal human experience that emotion becomes irrelevant, becomes a luxury that belongs to people who aren't fighting for their lives at 22,000 feet. 9 down. Or is it 10? He's lost count. The numbers don't matter anymore. What matters is that his guns are empty now, the barrels smoking and silent, and there are still 3 more fighters closing in, and he has nothing left to shoot them with except the anger and fear and desperate will to survive that keeps his hands on the useless controls. The bomber shudders again. A deep structural groan that sounds like a living thing in pain, like a wounded animal that knows it's dying but keeps trying to run anyway. The number 2 engine coughs, sputters, dies. The nose drops. The aircraft picks up speed in the descent, trading altitude for airspeed in an equation that can only end one way. Through the intercom static, Magee hears something, a voice, distorted and faint, maybe the pilot or maybe the co-pilot or maybe just his imagination giving him something to hold on to. The voice says one word, repeated 3 times, bail out, bail out, bail out. But Magee can't bail out. The ball turret has no escape hatch, no emergency exit, no way to leave except by rotating it to align with the hatch in the fuselage above, then climbing up and out through the main aircraft. And to do that, the turret needs hydraulic power, which the aircraft no longer has because the hydraulic lines were shredded by flak 10 minutes ago, because the red fluid coating his plexiglass is the same fluid that should be moving through pistons and cylinders and making the turret rotate. He tries the manual hand crank, a backup system that requires 40 complete rotations to move the turret into position, but something is jammed, something is broken, something has failed in the way that all systems eventually fail when you push them beyond their design limits. The crank won't move, the turret won't rotate, and the bomber is falling. The remaining German fighters make one more pass, their cannon fire tearing into the dying B-17 like predators ensuring their kill, like executioners making certain. Rounds punch through the fuselage above Magee's head, and he can hear them impacting, can hear the screams that might be whined through torn metal or might be something worse. The bomber rolls to the left, keeps rolling, picks up speed in a spiral that pins Magee against the side of his turret with G-forces that gray his vision, that press his oxygen mask into his face hard enough to bruise. He's going to die in here, trapped in this glass sphere, riding the bomber all the way down to German soil where it will crater and burn and be forgotten except as a serial number in some Air Force ledger of losses. Then something breaks, some structural member finally giving up, some bolt or rivet or welded seam deciding it's done its job for long enough, and the turret tears away from the aircraft. Just separates. Just falls free. Magee has one instant to understand what's happening, one flash of comprehension where his brain processes the fact that he's no longer attached to the bomber, that he's falling independently now, that the plexiglass sphere that was his prison has become something else, something he doesn't have a word for. The bomber tumbles away above him, on fire from nose to tail, breaking apart as it falls, shedding pieces of itself like a wounded bird shedding feathers. And Magee falls with it, past it, faster than it because his turret is smaller and more aerodynamic and less willing to resist the pull of gravity. The earth below is no longer an abstraction, no longer a map viewed from safe altitude. It's real and close and approaching at 120 miles per hour, the terminal velocity of a ball turret with a man inside. He can see individual buildings now, can see roads and trees and a train station in the town of St. Nazaire, can see the life he's about to end spread out beneath him in perfect detail. He tries to curl tighter, tries to protect his head with his arms, tries to do something, anything, that might help him survive an impact that every law of physics says should kill him instantly. The ground rushes up. The wind screams. The world becomes a blur of brown and green and gray. And then Alan Magee hits the glass roof of the St. Nazaire train station at 120 miles per hour and passes through it like a bullet through paper, and everything goes dark. Darkness. Silence. The absence of wind and engine noise and gunfire, replaced by a ringing in his ears that sounds like the echo of church bells heard from underwater, distant and distorted and somehow holy. Alan Magee opens his eyes, or thinks he opens them, can't be entirely sure because the darkness remains, because the world refuses to come back into focus, because his brain is struggling to process the simple fact that he still has eyes to open, that he still exists as a continuous consciousness rather than as scattered pieces spread across a train station floor. He tries to move and discovers that movement is possible, that his body still responds to commands from his mind, that the connection between intention and action hasn't been severed by impact. This is the first miracle, that he's conscious, that he's thinking, that somewhere in his chest, his heart is still beating. Pain comes next, arriving in waves that start at his extremities and roll inward toward his core, each wave bringing new information about damage, about trauma, about the price the human body pays when it falls 4 miles and survives. His right arm is broken. He can feel the wrongness in it, the way the bones grind against each other when he tries to move, the way his hand won't close into a fist no matter how hard he concentrates. His ribs are broken too, maybe all of them on his right side, maybe shattered into fragments that press against his lungs and make each breath a negotiation with agony. His ankle is twisted at an angle that ankles aren't supposed to achieve, and his back feels like someone has driven a railroad spike directly into his spine, like the vertebrae have compressed and fused and will never properly separate again. But he's alive. Impossibly, inexplicably, against every statistical probability and medical prediction, he's alive. The ball turret didn't survive, it shattered on impact, the plexiglass that was supposed to be bulletproof turning out to be no match for a glass train station roof and the immutable laws of physics. But somehow the turret broke his fall, somehow the layers of material, plexiglass, then glass, then air, then more material, dissipated enough energy that his body wasn't instantly pulverized. Somehow he hit at just the right angle, with just the right spin, with just the right distribution of force across just the right structural members. Somehow the universe looked at all the variables that should have resulted in his death and decided to round up instead of down, to let him live instead of die. Voices now, speaking German, coming closer. Footsteps on broken glass. Magee tries to sit up and manages to prop himself on his left elbow, the one that still works, the one that didn't take the full force of impact. Through the haze of pain and shock, he can see shapes moving toward him. Soldiers, Wehrmacht, rifles slung over their shoulders, their faces showing an expression that Magee recognizes even through the blur of his concussed vision. This wonder, this disbelief. It's the look people get when they witness something that shouldn't be possible, when reality breaks its own rules right in front of them and leaves them scrambling for explanations. One of the soldiers kneels beside him, says something in German that Magee doesn't understand, then switches to broken English. "You fall? From sky? You fall from sky?" Magee nods, or thinks he nods, can't quite tell if his head is moving or if the world is tilting. The soldier calls out to his companions, his voice high and excited, and more men gather around, staring at Magee like he's a creature from another planet, like he's proof of something miraculous or supernatural or both. They help him to his feet or try to, but his right leg won't support weight, collapses under him, sends him back down to his knees on the broken glass and twisted metal. A medic pushes through the crowd, a German kid who can't be more than 18, who kneels and begins checking Magee's injuries with hands that are surprisingly gentle considering they belong to the enemy, considering this is war and compassion is supposed to be rationed like ammunition. The medic speaks in rapid German to the soldiers around him, and Magee catches enough of the tone to understand. This man needs a hospital, needs it now, needs treatment that field medicine can't provide. They fashion a stretcher from a door torn off its hinges, lay Magee on it as carefully as they would handle their own wounded, carry him out of the train station into the gray afternoon light of occupied France. As they move through the streets, civilians gather to watch. French men and women and children who should hate him, who should spit on him, who have every reason to celebrate the death of another American bomber crewman. But they don't. They just stare, silent and serious, bearing witness to something they know they'll tell their grandchildren about. The day a man fell from the sky and lived. The German military hospital in St. Nazaire is overwhelmed with casualties from the bombing raid. Hallways lined with wounded soldiers and civilians. The smell of blood and antiseptic and suffering thick enough to taste. But they make room for Magee, carry him to a surgical bay where a doctor with gray hair and tired eyes examines him with the same wonder the soldiers showed. The doctor speaks to his assistants in medical German, pointing to x-rays that show the damage, broken arm, broken ribs, shattered ankle, compressed vertebrae, internal bleeding, and a dozen other injuries that should be fatal in combination but somehow aren't. The doctor keeps shaking his head, keeps returning to examine Magee's back, keeps checking the x-rays as if he's missed something, as if there's some explanation hidden in the images that would make this survival make sense. They operate that night, set his bones, drain his internal bleeding, put him back together as best they can with the limited supplies and equipment available in a military hospital in a war zone. When Magee wakes from the anesthesia, he's in a ward with other prisoners of war, American and British airmen who were shot down and captured, who look at him with questions in their eyes. One of them, a pilot with bandages covering half his face, leans over from the next bed and asks, "What happened to you?" And Magee, his voice hoarse and weak, tells him about the ball turret, about the 12 fighters, about the fall, about waking up alive when alive was impossible. The pilot listens, nods slowly, then says 5 words that will follow Magee for the rest of his life. "God must need you alive. Alan Magee survived." That's the simple truth that defies every calculation, every probability, every reasonable expectation of what the human body can endure. He spent the rest of the war in a German POW camp, his shattered bones healing slowly, his mind replaying that fall every night in dreams that never quite became nightmares because the ending was always the same. He lived. When the war ended and he returned home to New Jersey, doctors examined him with the same wonder the German medic had shown, studying his x-rays like archaeologists studying artifacts from an impossible civilization. They found no medical explanation for his